Yes?
The term discretionary means you can basically say yes or no.
That's right.
When a developer is proposing, a private party is proposing improvements on public property, let's say, like a drainage facility or something on the public property, and they have to ask for approval by the public agency, let's say the city. Well, the city presumably has absolute discretion. So does that element have to be assessed by the city as whether it's a priority project or not?
If I guess I have to think about that one. If that drainage facility you're talking about is wrapped into is essential to the overall development planning and site design process for the private land, then I think it's part of the project. And I don't know that I would necessarily view it as separating out as a standalone little decision over here. It would normally, that would be identified, at least the need for it, not the design, detailed design, need for it would be identified early on. Then the question is that, well, of course, your example is a drainage project. The Santa Ana permit says even drainage facilities in public streets are WQMP projects. So I think I'd have to say that would be, it would be part of the overall project and processed that way.
So if, for example, during construction, they found out they needed to do more than they thought about, expand the size of an outlet or whatever on the public property, you basically, as a city, go back and say, you need to amend your WQMP, we'll look at it as part of that.
Yeah, I guess so. Although all of this is trying as much as possible to drive permittees and the developers or the landowners or whoever's coming through with a project to try to flesh those things out early, flesh those things out during the initial discretionary project stage. And that's partly because so much of the LID BMPs are really tied up in the land and the shape and form of the land and how it's being used. And so this whole issue of but the other thing is, and this is where the Santa Ana board is coming from particularly, was trying to make sure that that it aligns with CEQA and done in a parallel fashion with CEQA, so that the preliminary model WQMP, or at least the decisions that are going to drive that, are made early, and that can very likely, in most cases, describing what's been decided for that, be the basis for saying there won't be water quality impacts, or the mitigation is what's in the model WQMP. So linking the two together so that there's not a disconnect between CEQA review and processing or challenges and processing deciding on model WQMP. So that's a major theme that was driven through here. Project description, what's the overall project description? Is it North County versus South County? Are there environmentally sensitive areas? Eligibility for water quality credits. We're going to talk about water quality credits further. That was a hotly debated topic. It is in the Santa Ana permit. It's kind of in the San Diego permit. It can allow some relief, but not a lot the way it finally ended up. And are there specifically being approaches? So the project description is where you identify things that might narrow or redirect some of the decision making for LID BMPs based on some of the things. That gets into the site assessment, gathering information, determining whether there are hydrologic conditions of concern. That's all about where does the project discharge its stormwater, or where will it discharge its stormwater, and is the downstream water body that it's going to hardened? That's a simple term. There's the permit is, i.e. paved or lined all the way essentially to the ocean or the receiving water, or not. A major decision, we'll talk about that further, but this is where you identify whether or not a project is going to kick into a need to evaluate hydrologic conditions of concern any further, or just the basic water quality functions. And so you use the site assessment to determine the applicable performance criteria. Okay, so here I've already talked about, this is the language from the permit when a hydrologic condition of concern exists. So it's really driven by where is the project, where is its discharge, what's the downstream receiving water body, and whether or not it is quote, hardened or susceptible to erosion if new change conditions result from the project. And there's a lot of mapping, and Eric will talk about some of that mapping in the technical guidance document. The pollutants of concern section is similar to before. It's kind of updated a little bit. You know, you look at the primary pollutants of concern. Quite honestly, if you're driving, if you're looking at infiltration or harvest and reuse, the retention lid BMPs, pollutants of concern in effect aren't really an issue because you're retaining all the water that you're required to retain under the permit, and you're essentially thereby removing all the pollutants from the receiving water. If you're looking at BMPs that release some water, biofiltration with release or some of the alternative treatment, then you have to know what's going to drive your decisions for your receiving water. All right, so then the next major topic in the water quality plan is selecting lid BMPs. What are the basic performance criteria? Based on that, select BMPs, lid BMPs, site design BMPs, and if need be, hydromodification BMPs, and then finally source control BMPs. Okay. Performance criteria, you know, several. We already talked about as a project street. Does hydromodification apply or not? Is there a approved watershed infiltration hydromodification management plan that might lead to different criteria or open up different possibilities? Some of you may know, particularly some of you that are actually in this area, the county developed the first model watershed hydromodification implementation plan for Coyote Creek watershed, and submitted that to the Santa Ana board in May. Got a lot of comments, so we're working through it. The idea is that it will be one of those done in North County over the next year, I think, and that may drive some criteria. And then the primary thing for lid is a capture volume, design capture volume. Similar to what's been in the older permits, there's a storm event, there's a certain amount, it generates a certain amount of volume. It's how you get there is a little bit, there's clearly examples in the WQMP and guidance document, but that's the primary focus, is trying to achieve the design capture volume with your lid BMPs. And then if you're looking at treatment control BMPs after lid, if you have to, what are the performance criteria, it's going to be similar. So there's blocks of BMPs. There's a whole host that are lid, low impact development BMPs that are primarily on site, and there's a whole range of those. There are the opportunity for regional, sub-regional BMPs. There are a variety of ways that can be incorporated into a project either on site or downstream in the water body to deal with hydromodification if that's an issue. Some site design BMPs are oftentimes the first thing that are thought of to kind of help align the site to minimize the need for other BMPs, and finally source control BMPs. There's lists, I won't go through them in detail, but these are the primary, all the different choices. They're all in the permit. You'll hear more from Eric, that fall under the umbrella of lid. And we tried to make that as open as possible to maximize the number of BMPs that could be considered lid, so that you don't, that it gives them the maximum opportunity for a project to select one of those. Site design are all the things that they've been around, they've been a tool, a technique, they've been talked about in your WQMP. Now they're even more important because of the quantitative nature of lid. Anything you can do from this list that can be done with site design to therefore reduce the remaining design capture volume that you have to deal with lid and or other BMPs are getting much greater emphasis now. Okay. Then there's the whole issue of feasibility analysis. model WQP has to show that either the project was able to achieve, meet the design capture volume, i.e. retain or biotreat and release a certain volume based on the project location and the rainfall and the characteristics of the project, with low impact development BMPs, or demonstrate why it's not feasible to do that. And it's a rigorous process of demonstration. You'll hear more about that later. But the WQMP sets up that process, and the technical guidance document gives the tools to say why it is either feasible, in which case you don't really have to do a feasibility analysis. You just put the BMPs into the design of the project. You show that you've met the volume, you're done. If you can't show that, then you have to go through this rigorous analysis. And it's largely described in the guidance document.